Generative AI syntheses, moreover, are highly computation intensive. It's estimated that every time a person uses a generative system in lieu of a conventional search engine to obtain simple information, the cost in energy and water is at least 10 times as much. And of course, the obtained information may be wrong or biased in any number of ways, like the first Muslim president. And that's on top of all the surveillance and micro-targeting, which is a search engine issue that has made Google a once venerated icon of the internet age, a synonym for at least some people for enshittification. It's my understanding that librarians voted that as the word of the year. Yeah, librarians. Cory Doctorow's term for digital platforms that capture their users by offering high quality service, which they afterwards degrade in the effort to extract more and more profit at the expense of their users and the user experience. There are, of course, good alternatives. My college-age daughter, who cares a lot about privacy, likes DuckDuckGo, and I myself use Kaggy. But increasingly, students are not searching at all. As we know, the Association of College and Research Libraries defines information literacy as a process of inquiry, discovery, and serendipity, a complex experience that affects and is affected by the cognitive, affective, and social dimensions of the searcher. What's good about high-quality search engines, among other research tools that are high quality, is that it situates them as active researchers, thus helping them to fulfill learning goals. For example, when I teach writing across the disciplines at Rutgers, which I do a lot now, a core goal is the ability to evaluate and critically assess sources, use the conventions of attribution and citation correctly, as well as to analyze and synthesize information and ideas from multiple sources to generate new insights. Depending on how it's used, generative AI subverts every single one of those goals. Even when the outputs are accurate, with no means of reliably adducing sources from their training data, which is, first buried because of undocumentedness and sheer size, but also because they're proprietary, they diminish inquiry, discovery, serendipity, and synthesis. By serving up the most statistically probable content in pre-digested form. There isn't a lot of research yet on this. But what little research we have is already starting to show, for example, that when students brainstorm with chatbots, which some recommend as an innocuous form of generative AI use, it reduces their own confidence in their ideas and their self-efficacy. That's the term of the researchers, not me. And of course, I think many of you know, many in the audience know that because the results are probabilistic, you have situations where young people are sending almost identical job letters to employers without realizing that that's what they're doing. And people are becoming faster at doing certain tasks, but at the expense of their work looking more like each other's, less variety. And the very, very top people, actually, their quality diminishes as everyone looks more the same. And this is a kind of almost like a model collapse scenario. For those of you who know that term, know that some researchers have trained models on the outputs of previous models and found that eventually, as the probabilities dominate reality, so intensively, the models collapse because they lose their ability to predict anything that hasn't, it's just too narrow, too narrow. So, research, of course, it's an old human endeavor. And I'm sure that I'm not a historian of research, but I think what I'm trying to make clear here is that these discussions haven't been had yet. And I know that librarians in particular are expected to know the answers in dialogue with colleagues. And of course, professors too are being urged to use generative AI. And there are already examples of papers that begin with the sentence, "Certainly, here is an introduction for your research paper." I'm an editor of a journal. I don't think that's ever going to happen in the pages of Critical AI. So I leave you with those thoughts. I'm so excited to listen to all of you. I'm so excited for the work that we're going to be doing as we try to put together some formulative ideas for best practices for research in the era of generative AI. Thank you again.
Hello, my name is Emma May. I'm a student in the School of Communication and Information at Rutgers. I research the politics of information and tech refusal in activist movements around interrelated struggles for economic, racial, and disability justice. I'm filling in for Dr. Bird Paris today, who unfortunately could not be here. For this opening keynote panel titled The Future of Undergraduate Research, we have brought in two of the best, most insightful thinkers in the area to share some of their thoughts on this topic. Luke Stark is a leading researcher in the ethical, historical, and social impacts of computational technologies, including artificial intelligence systems. He has written formative critical texts on AI and how dominant academic discourse gets a lot wrong about AI ethics, focuses on the wrong problems, and misses larger issues of structural power. His texts with Anna Lauren Hoffman and Dan Green, Better, Nicer, Clearer, Fairer, a critical assessment of the movement for ethical artificial intelligence and machine learning, is one that should be of interest to all of us as critical researchers of artificial intelligence. He has also written extensively about the political economy and daily user experiences of gig work technologies, labor, surveillance, and how data-driven technologies structure work. We are lucky to have him with us to discuss the utility, or lack thereof, of artificial intelligence applications in research settings. Stark has a long list of prestigious affiliations and accomplishments, and here I will name just a few in case you need further acquaintance. He is an assistant professor of the Faculty of Information and Media Studies at Western University in London, Ontario. Before joining FIMS, he was a postdoctoral researcher in Fairness, Accountability, Transparency, and Ethics group at the Microsoft Research Center in Montreal, a fellow and affiliate of the Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society at Harvard University. Jane Rosenzweig is the director of the Harvard College Writing Center and teaches writing and editing courses at Harvard College and Harvard Extension School. She holds a BA from Yale University, an MLit from Oxford, and an MFA in fiction writing from the University of Iowa Writers Workshop. She has been a staff editor at the Atlantic Monthly and a member of the fiction staff at the New Yorker. Her work has been published in the New York Times, Harvard Business Review, and the American Prospect, the Boston Globe, the Chronicle Review, Glimmer Train, 17, and the May Anthology of Oxford and Cambridge Short Stories. She is also the author of Writing Hacks newsletter. Today, she will be talking to us about how discussions around artificial intelligence tools for education are not about the tools themselves, but rather are debates about what our goals around teaching are and why we teach research to undergrads in the first place. Thank you so much, Jane and Luke, for joining us as you kick off our event.
Lauren and Francesca and everyone who's organized this event. I'm delighted to be here to talk to you a little bit about what I'm seeing on the ground as a first-year writing instructor. I feel like ever since ChatGPT was released, every time I give a talk, I now provide no thesis and no advice, but just questions. And I'll be doing a little bit of that this morning. My view from the ground is that I have been teaching first-year writing to Harvard College first-year students for 24 years, and things have changed rapidly in the past couple of years. I currently teach a course called To What Problem is ChatGPT the Solution, which has been a delightful experience to be exploring these things with my undergraduate students. They do not use ChatGPT or other generative AI tools to write their papers, but we are constantly exploring what's to come and what's going on. The title for my talk comes from something that a high school teacher I know said to me, should we just stop doing this? After we had a conversation that, are we seeing this, that looked, that was sparked by something like this, not this video, but a similar one. Are you able to play that?
Want me to play it?
Thank you. That's it. That's the whole research paper he gives you in a couple of steps. TikTok, YouTube are full of these sorts of videos. I've asked my students, they are absolutely seeing them. This is the quick fix view of what's coming for us now with the research paper. This is not what I'm seeing in the classroom, but this is certainly out there in a way that it wasn't before. And so when I was talking to this high school teacher about this, and she said, what are we going to do? Should we just stop teaching research? That just stuck in my head because of course that's not what we're going to do, but I understand where that's coming from. So the considerations from the ground that I wanted to raise with you today as just sort of things to think about, propositions that I think are worth thinking about as we try to figure out what to do next are the following, and I'll look at each of them for a couple of minutes. Learning to do research as a student is different from doing research as a scholar, and the ways in which we're talking about using these tools as potentially for research is different than I think the conversation that we need to be having about the way that we want to use these tools in the classroom. That goes along with my second proposition. AI tools are likely to play a different role for undergraduates than they do for researchers. We're already seeing this. And finally, and I think this has been sort of my theme for this new academic year, if last year was the year where we were thinking a lot about what can these tools do, and obviously all the questions that Lauren has raised about whether we think that's a good idea, this year, what I'm seeing is a gap in the conversation between the way AI research tools could be used and the way I think they're likely to be used by my students and by other students. And I get this just from my own thinking about this, but also because I think this is possible. Oh, I didn't advance. I'm sorry. I'm working on my computer and back there. So those are my three propositions for what I want to just talk briefly about. Much of this has come from my conversations with my students, but also I spent the summer trying to figure out how a number of these research tools worked and imagining what would change about the way I teach research to first-year students based on the existence of these tools. There are a couple of wonderful librarians in the virtual audience from the Harvard libraries who I've been asking, what do I do? What should we do? And as I said, I'm hoping that the rest of the panels today will have the answers. I really only have the questions. So I want to start just by thinking a little bit about the difference between the goals that we have for learning to do research and the goals that we have when we're doing research. So when I am in my classroom with my students, and they have not done research at the university level before, I'm focusing on, I think, a different list of priorities, right? How do we ask a question that's worth asking? How do we find sources, evaluate them? How do we know what's been said, where the gaps are? What do they want to know about? Then, of course, there's how to cite, why research matters, and all of the critical thinking skills that Lauren talked about in her introduction, right? What are we actually doing? We're trying to develop this ability to think critically. Whereas when I talk to some people I know who are doing research and are excited about these tools in various ways as academics, it's a different prospect, right? We're going to see, can these tools help us answer questions that we already have, or find the gaps very quickly, or solve the problems, or, we all are trying to join a conversation. But I think these are two really different conversations that we're having. And I started to think about this more when I read this really interesting article over the summer by two researchers. This was published in Nature by a researcher at Yale and a researcher at Princeton, where they proposed some of the roles that they see for AI in scientific research. So the oracle who digests large bodies of material for you, the quant who can process your data, a surrogate who can actually produce synthetic data for you, and then the arbiter who would be in some way more objective than the researcher. This is a critical piece in Nature. They're not saying that they think these are good ideas. They're just thinking through what might happen as these tools play a role in the expert research process. And so the question I had was, is this at all what we're thinking about when we think about the roles that these tools might play in our students' experiences? And I don't think so. I think that the roles that we're hearing about and thinking about when we think about what's going to happen with our students and AI research tools looks more like a potential customer service agent in the way that the video I showed you at the beginning suggests, right? Give me a paper, give me a thesis, do these things for me. Potentially as a tutor or a teacher or a partner or an assistant. These are all terms that I'm drawing from the commercial sector, right? This is what Microsoft and OpenAI are telling you that your research tool, the role that it might play. That doesn't mean that it can't. But I think we need to start from this position of thinking realistically about what these tools may do for our students. So what happens when this novice researcher encounters these tools, I think, is going to depend on a number of factors that are very different from what happens when a researcher encounters these tools. One is intuition. We see this with Google and Google Scholar, right? Our students use these tools the way they use other tools. So they're going to go in there and they're going to do what they've always done with these tools, which in many ways is what they do with Google. You just ask it a question in the way that they do that. And so I think we need to be prepared to meet them there. Instruction, which is the next piece, right? How they're taught to use these tools. Right now, I don't know a lot of people who are teaching undergraduates how to use these tools. This is something that I've begun to think about. My research paper begins in about 4 weeks, so I'm hoping by the end of today, I will know how to do that. The assignment, what are we asking students to do? We've been talking in our program about what it looks like to ask students to make an annotated bibliography in a landscape where they can make an annotated bibliography in 2 seconds. And is that going to be the step that we take in the future, or is there another step? And then finally, and I think this goes back to the video I showed you, the marketing. I've read a couple of really interesting pieces by Mark Watkins, who's doing a lot of research in this field about what's coming at students every day in terms of how they think they should use these tools. Research Rabbit, which we'll take a quick look at in a minute, is being marketed as Spotify for research papers. And, that is right where you get the students. They're all on Spotify. They know how to use that. So thinking about how they're going to use these tools in those ways. So I wanted to just quickly show you some of what I've been doing this summer to try to figure this out. I've been working with a research question that's similar to a question that one of my students asked in the spring. So the level and type of question that we might get from a novice researcher. She was very interested in what effects AI generated models were going to have on teenage girls and their self-esteem. And so there's a lot of reasons why our students are asking a research question. She had genuine interest. She had done some modeling. She was really freaked out by this. This was coming from something for her. But often our students in a first-year writing course are asking a question because the assignment requires them to ask a question. Maybe it's sparked by reading or preliminary research, or in some cases, they've been given a question. So what happens now is going to be different than what happened traditionally, right? Traditionally, we would go to our library session, identify sources from various databases. I would talk to my students about following a source trail. You read something interesting, you find the citations, you go on to something else. Beginning to get a sense of this conversation, this annotated bibliography step, and then we have a better question, hopefully coming out of that, and we're starting the process again. So there were plenty of challenges pre-AI. We have plenty. I like to talk about what problems are we trying to solve. There are plenty of problems that we can solve in the research process, right? Students don't know where to begin. They don't know which sources to focus on. They leave it till the last minute. They search library catalogs as if they're Google, and they say there's nothing there that will help them, and we need to get them past that. Often the sources chosen are the ones that are easiest to find, not necessarily the ones that are useful. I also think that there's often too much focus on the nuts and bolts, right? People become hyper-focused on their citations rather than on the ideas and the conversation that they're doing. So in the spirit of my question that I always ask, what problems are we trying to solve? I started to think about, well, can AI solve any of these problems? So, and this, of course, we're going to bracket, although I don't think we should, all of the other sort of ethical reasons why you might choose to use AI, but just thinking very practically, right? Could AI solve any of these challenges? So possibly, I mean, if we look at the way the tools are being marketed, but also, some of the tools I've used have been helpful in various ways. Students don't know where to begin. Is there a way in which getting to this context could be helpful? Students have trouble knowing which sources to focus on. Is it possible that evaluating sources through AI tools could be helpful? Time constraints, less time on unfruitful paths. I have mixed feelings about this. Lauren raised this point, right? Sometimes the unfruitful paths are actually the fruitful paths. Students search library catalogs as if they're Google. Maybe these new tools will be more intuitive in a way that works for the way that they have searched for information in the past. So these are, more intuitive searches might possibly lead them to more depth in their searching. And maybe if we put aside the nuts and bolts, we end up with more emphasis on what they're interested in. So, I'm putting that out there, but at the same time, and this is where I come to my point, right? I think there's a gap between what AI tools could do and what in many cases AI tools are likely to do. So students don't know where to begin. Oh, I'll just begin where the chatbot tells me to begin. And I'm not talking about students who don't want to learn here. I'm just talking about the way these tools are set up. Students have trouble knowing which sources to focus on. Okay, well, I'm going to get 4 sources very quickly from the bot, and I'm just going to go with that. Time constraints, well, I can get most of my paper outlined this way. And again, the searching, we're just doing the easiest things and moving forward in that way. So as I'm trying to think about how to teach research in this new landscape, I'm really trying to think about how we fill this gap between, if we're going to use these tools, if we find that some of them are useful in some ways, that's not necessarily how they're going to be used. So, and that brings me to where I started thinking about the role that these tools may play for undergraduate students, right? Customer service agent. And this is the problem that I think I'm trying to solve in the classroom this year. In this landscape, how does research not become a customer service process? I ask you something, you give it to me, and I take it. Customer service agents, I think we all know, are very frustrating often in real life scenarios. But the job of a customer service agent is not to help you think critically about your problem. It is to solve your problem as quickly as possible so that you will go away. And that is not the traditionally what we want in research tools. So going back to my students' research question, I put it into a number of these tools. So the big ones that I have worked with this summer: Perplexity, Elicit, Consensus, and Research Rabbit. I just went through and I took my students' research question because I wanted to think about what's likely to happen if my student has a question, if a student has a question, and they approach these sources. And you can see where the challenges are going to come in, right? We can put in our question. Now I have to put on my glasses to look at this. we can put in our question, we get some sources, but we also get the beginning of an answer to our question very quickly. These things are not differentiated. It's not like when you go into a library catalog and you get sources. Here it's, you're getting the conversation, you're getting some unknown algorithm that's leading you to these sources. You don't know why. And it's already doing things that I would want my students to be doing. So I can also do this when I interact with Perplexity. What's a good thesis statement? Okay, here's a thesis statement. A strong thesis statement is this. Now, bracketing whether this is a strong thesis statement. This is an all-in-one tool, right? It's a customer service app. I go in, I ask for a thesis statement, I get one. And then maybe I want to find some more sources, because again, I'm not talking just about a student who doesn't want to do anything. I'm talking about a student who has found Perplexity and is like, oh, wow, look at this. Where can I find sources on this topic? I'm getting some guidance. But again, I don't know why I'm getting the guidance I'm getting. I don't know what algorithm is driving me to these sources. And if I'm a student, I'm not sure I'm going to ask any questions. I'm going to take my sources and run with them. So there's a way in which I think we're always looking for what these will be good for. And one thing that people keep saying is, well, maybe it can tell you all of the research that's already happened and then give you a new starting point, right? So it'll give you a question that you will then have to go and research. So I started this process with Elicit, which looks a lot like Perplexity. And I was like, okay, what's the impact of fashion models on teenage girls' self-esteem? And I followed it through a little bit. And I got a conclusion, right? It said, well, now what we need to do is we need strategies to mitigate the negative effects. And I'm thinking, okay, so maybe my student is going to say, well, a lot of research has been done, but I'm going to go research the strategies we need to mitigate the negative effects. But wait, there's an app for that too. I just went back in and I said, what are the negative effects? And I got an answer. I mean, how do we mitigate the negative effects? And I got an answer for that too. So I think it's going to be hard when using these tools if we say things to our students like, use that as a starting point, make it a launching pad for your own research, because these apps, you can just take that as an endless cycle. It gave me a starting point for my own research, but I just put that in and I got a new end point. I'll put that in as my starting point. And I don't think our students are prepared at this point to use that in a way that would be useful. So I also, I'm a little behind here. I was not showing you. So take the endpoint and research that, right? So I got the endpoint and I got these new things. I'm sorry, I'm a little out of sync with advancing my slides. I won't go into detail with this, but I also looked at consensus, which I think is really interesting because it has a GPT in ChatGPT. So students can access consensus right from a ChatGPT account. I wanted to show you this because I don't think this means anything to students. This is an explanation of how a consensus search works and how results are determined, that offers really no information that would help you figure out whether you were getting valid output from this. So we say right now to our students, or I say to my students, understand where this source comes from. Is it peer reviewed? Was it in this database? Where did you get it? And now I'm looking at a situation where they're going to be saying, well, the relevance score was combined with the this and the that, and that's how I got it. But we don't know really what that means. So in the consensus GPT, which is built right into ChatGPT, you can just ask it to write your paper for you. This is being billed as your assistant. But again, your assistant is there to assist you in whatever you ask your assistant to do. So what will be the impact of AI-generated fashion models on the self-esteem of teenage girls? Here's a paper for you right out of my consensus GPT. There's the co-pilot feature where you can ask further questions, right? It's giving me all the little numbers are sources that I can click on that again, if I go back to my consensus explanation page, I don't really know why I got these particular sources. So I also, and this is what I've been highly recommending to all of my colleagues, right? The best way to understand what's going on in these tools is to put in something that you know from your own research and see what kinds of results you're getting, and then sort of work from there. I wrote a master's thesis about the integration of women into the British military in World War II. So I spent a long time in here working through these sources. They're not wrong and bad in some way. They're just somewhat random, right? It's not like what many of us are used to, where a database might help you identify a path that other researchers have been down in this way. This is just like, here's some stuff, and I don't quite know how I got it. But it is interesting because it's not that the sources themselves are terrible, which is why our students could do their own writing based on a quick consensus search on 4 sources. Finally, I wanted to take a quick look at Research Rabbit, the Spotify approach. So Research Rabbit, I set up my account. You put papers that are of interest to you into your profile. And then just like in Spotify, it suggests other sources that you might be interested in, but we don't know why. So again, I'm hoping that the next panel where we have some librarians, they will tell me why. But I think what I'm talking about is how our students will not know why, right? They're just going to get this profile and they're going to fill it up. It's interesting. I found it interesting to be in there working with what I was given. But it's also pretty imperfect. So you get these little things, you have your dashboard and you have your recommended sources. And one of the things that it will do is show you a kind of map of relevant sources with lots of little pictures and graphs, and you don't even know how you got that or why. Again, it's kind of interesting. One of the things that it will do is give you other sources by the same author, but the very first time I did that, I got sources by a different author with the same name, and there was no distinguishing in there. So these are the sorts of things that I think our students are not prepared for. So I don't want to say that it's all bad news. I'm always the person on every panel delivering bad news. So I do wonder, and I think we need to be talking about, right, what are the different roles that AI could take on as a research tool for students? Is it possible that these could be ways to mitigate some of the very real problems I think students have when they have 3 weeks to write a research paper, where a lot of their time is spent on apparatus and not a lot of their time is spent on thinking? So could we design assignments that could make use of these tools to identify conversations, to suggest sources that are actually relevant to those conversations? And for our students who already aren't finding the sources that they're interested in, could we, could these tools help us make that possible? So back to, should we just stop teaching the research paper? My answer is no. But I think we have some questions that we need to really address. Are we going all in on these tools? Is this the future? If this is what our students are using anyway, what are we doing about that? Could a chatbot be a first step in a conversation or a research tool? Is it feasible to think about what these tools can't do and start our process there, or to somehow limit the use of these tools or better integrate them into the process? So my goal for this semester has been to start with my goals and work backwards and try to figure out, how I'm still doing the things that I think are important to do, even with these tools in the mix, right? Skills for future research. I want my students to be able to navigate these tools, which begins with some critical AI literacy background for all students. I want to be fostering intellectual curiosity, which often seems at odds with what I showed you in the video at the beginning. But I also think that we don't always do a good job at helping our students identify the existing conversations that they want to join. And so I'm open to what we might be able to do differently. Because I'm always so cautionary, I wanted to end. I have another quick video. I'm not going to show you the whole thing here, but I think our students are really interested in research and in learning. And I really think that there is a way forward, even with all that I've raised today. This is just a clip of a student who won something at Harvard last spring called the 3-minute thesis competition, where she presented her thesis research in 3 minutes. And I'm not going to play you all 3 minutes, but can you just give it a start so that we're ending on a high note? We have sound. I don't know.
Sorry.
You know what, it's okay. I think we can just sort of, I think you get the idea. What I wanted to show you is someone who cares deeply about what she was learning and spent more than a year working on this research. And this is the student that I want to be preparing in my first year. This is a senior, right? I still want her to want to do that when she's a senior. So that is where I will leave you. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. And thank you for the invitation. It's really lovely to be here. I'm going to first say that the place from which I'm speaking to you here and online, and the lands on which Rutgers University is located, is the ancestral territory of the Lenape people. And I ask we pay respect to Indigenous people throughout the Lenape diaspora and across Turtle Island, including the Anishinaabeg, the Haudenosaunee, the Lenapewak, and the Chinanton people, who are the caretakers of the lands on which my home institution, Western University in London, Ontario, is located. I ask that we show respect for the longstanding relationships that Indigenous nations have to these lands, and to acknowledge the historical and ongoing injustices that Indigenous peoples endure in Canada, the United States, and in other settler colonial territories. Recognizing these painful histories of genocide and forced removal, I ask us to honor the Indigenous communities still living on and connected to these lands, and circulating vibrantly in online spaces, and we can do so by striving for restorative justice for Indigenous peoples and for all those who have been marginalized and oppressed. And also, we'd like to thank Francesca, Lauren, Camille, and Britt for their hospitality and invitation, and also to Emma for that very kind introduction. It's lovely to be here, and I always nice to be back in the greater New York City area where I did my PhD at NYU. So a little bit of background about me. I am by training a historian and media theorist, and I study the social and ethical impacts of digital technologies, particularly artificial intelligence systems. And I sort of wear a historical hat and a non-historical hat. Historically, I think about the way that behavioral sciences and psychology have intersected with computer science. And then, as you maybe heard a little bit with my contemporary hat, I do work on the kind of contemporary AI ethics and AI governance, and also some work from the kind of tradition of values and design and critical design studies on how to actually build systems that express or elicit progressive values, which is not super easy. And my book project, which is on this topic around the history of emotion in computer science, is the draft is not quite yet finished, so hopefully a couple of years you'll see it somewhere in bookstores. Okay, so today I'm going to talk a little bit about work that I published earlier in the spring, and relate it to the topic of this symposium, which is focusing on education and research. And I'll do that sort of through three modes. One is to tell you what large language models actually are, although I think actually Lauren already did that, so maybe I'll go really quickly through that point. The bulk of the talk will be an argument that I make about ChatGPT as an animated character. And I'll explain what an animated character is, at least in my estimation, and why I think ChatGPT, and in fact many kind of instances of generative AI systems, are these sort of animated characters. And then finally, applying it to the topic of the day, I'm going to talk a little bit about how understanding ChatGPT as an animated character intersects with some of the questions that Jane has brought up brilliantly in her talk, and how that relates to the kind of the history of information. So I think I would say I agree with lots of what Jane said, most of what Jane said, and this will hopefully be a vehement agreement from a slightly different disciplinary perspective. Okay, so I don't think I need to tell this audience, right, that ChatGPT is a form of AI, is not the Terminator, nor is it Commander Data. It is a process of collecting, cleaning, preparing, manipulating data, training models on that data, predictive models, and then iterating on that set of training and improvement. So this is statistical processes, which are often very clever, but not sentient. And right, the chatbots powered by ChatGPT, like ChatGPT, or sorry, let me back up. So the chatbots powered by the GPT language model, by the large language model, work by predicting the likelihood that one word or phrase will follow another. These predictions are based on millions of parameters, so taken from or scraped from umpteen pages of digital text. And I think it's also important to note, right, that other machine learning techniques are then used to tune the model's response, right? So this could include what's called reinforcement learning with human feedback, right? The model will be tested on human interlocutors who will sort of point to or pick the most human-like response that the model provides, and then that recursively goes in and shapes the model's future responses, training output prompts to be more in line with human language uses. So this is just an example of how this works, right? That you've got a kind of set of, it's not just a kind of language model, it's also a variety of different kind of post-model interventions to create this kind of interface, right? That speaks or presents itself with a first-person singular pronoun. And this is an image of, this is sort of this question of vector spaces, right? The way that the kind of relative connections within a kind of virtual space of different words, different terms, and the likelihood of this model picking up the connections between the two. Okay. So ChatGPT is an animated character. So what do I mean by ChatGPT is an animated character? You're thinking here cartoons. What are you thinking? You're thinking Mickey Mouse? Sort of. I'm drawing here on really outstanding work from cultural and linguistic anthropology, and particularly the work of I would say probably the foremost anthropologist of animation working today, Terry Silvio. And she defines animation as the construction of social others through the projection of qualities perceived as human, life, soul, power, agency, intentionality, personality, etc., outside the self and onto the environment through acts of creation, perception, and interaction. So, right, not more than merely cartooning or puppetry, animation is a kind of descriptive paradigm, right? And one thing that Silvio argues, and I really agree, and other folks like anthropologist Ilana Gershon have also argued, is that animation increasingly defines the cultural contours of the 21st century and is broadly explicative for many forms of digital media and how we work with them. If you're interested in more, full credit, this is Silvio's fantastic book, which looks at these questions through the lens of a variety of case studies from the island of Taiwan. Animation can be understood as a kind of structuring trope, right? For understanding the relationships between digital technologies, creative industries, I think very much including academia, and our lived experience of mediation. And right, we think often of animation as cartoony. There is Mickey Mouse, but we can also think of it importantly as the kind of construction or projection of social others. And the best example of this, right, for me, is from that movie from about 20 years ago, Castaway, with Wilson the volleyball. There's Wilson the volleyball. You might remember that Tom Hanks, alone on his desert island, creates a face on a volleyball, and it's his best friend. It's his psychological support through his years of isolation. And so this is a very simple example of the kind of projection of a social other onto an inanimate object. And I could talk a lot about the different genres of animation, right? But there are many, and they they range from puppets, right, including this kind of Chinese dragon puppet, to and Silvio's talked a little bit about this, though not much, to the kind of humanoid androids like Sophia, and I would argue chat-based or text-based animations like the 1960s famous program Eliza, and today's ChatGPT. So, what are the characteristics of animated characters and animation? Why is this relevant to our conversation about chatbots and ChatGPT? One of the most important, I think, aspects of animation that Silvio identifies is the kind of disjunct between or the disjunct between the kind of perceived agency of a chatbot and the actual agency of its creation, right? So animation shows how ChatGPT's mechanism of agency is divided, right? Animated characters are typified often by many people coming together to imbue a single agent with the kind of perceived, the kind of material vitality that then convinces people that they are its own character. So if you think back to the Chinese dragon puppet, right? This is one character, presenting itself as one character within a kind of cultural context. But there are multiple people, each kind of, moving a pole, working in conjunction to give that character life and animation. So how does this apply in the context of ChatGPT? Well, it turns out that if we think about this kind of distributed agency in the context of chatbots or ChatGPT, the list of entities who are involved in creating, animating any single instance of a ChatGPT is quite long. It certainly includes, right, the kind of creative content or the people who are behind the creative content upon which the LLM is based. So this is an example from kind of visual or image-based LLMs, because I'm complaining, right, about the problem of labor in these systems, where the system has essentially taken a lot of images or text for which they don't have copyright access, and extrapolated the relationships between these images or texts, and is now making OpenAI or whoever a lot of money. But I think more notably, right, in terms of the history of animation, right, it also means that the audience co-creates with an animated character, but also the people who labor at it disappear into the background. So and the people who labor at co-creating a character in the case of ChatGPT includes the user, right? So the user, let's say the student user, is projecting onto the instance of ChatGPT that they're engaging with, and animating it as in ways that are as important as the many folks whose training data it's been used for, and of course the engineers who have developed it, and to say nothing of the low-paid Kenyan workers who have been, roped into doing the reinforcement learning for human feedback, often, dealing with all sorts of appalling outputs because the data that the system has been trained on is similarly appalling. So, right, just to kind of put a cap on this point, ChatGPT and similar technologies are not really generative in and of themselves, right? And if anything, the outputs of these systems are animated out of a very large pool of human labor, largely uncompensated and unrecognized, either by AI firms or any of the people who use these systems. And I think actually this is in some way an interesting conceptual point, right? Which is the way that a chatbot like ChatGPT works is the imposition of what Phil Avery calls a grammar of action, a kind of structured set of relationships between data onto human language itself. That's why it often produces quite legible and compelling outputs, right? Because the meaning making of the humans is what's being extracted and extruded, to use a kind of industrial metaphor. But it doesn't, it's just a grammar of action. It's not, the system is not in any way, as Jen has pointed out, intelligent or sentient or even comprehensible, Okay, so, and I'll throw this is just a point about the grammar of action. I think this is one of my favorite quotes from Marx, and it seems to have kind of new relevance in the context of ChatGPT, right? That whereas the labor that is being sucked up in these systems is both the labor of the living and the dead, and probably most of us in this room, right? I suspect that many of us have contributed text to the corpuses that ChatGPT has trained on. Okay, so then the second point that I want to kind of touch on around animation is first of the so-called ELIZA effect. So going back to that famous chatbot from the 1960s, ELIZA. ELIZA was developed by Joseph Weizenbaum at MIT, and it's a kind of chatbot that mimics a Rogerian psychotherapist, a psychotherapist that kind of asks you questions about the things you're saying in therapy. And it's very recursive. So you say, it says, what are you worried about? I say, I'm worried about my marriage. Oh, what worries you about your marriage? And out of a very simple kind of structure of code, produces quite evocative effects. Again, 1960, right? Weizenbaum was reportedly alarmed at how compelling this system was to the people at MIT he showed it to. So the ELIZA effect has sort of become the kind of generic term for when people attribute human level intelligence, as this article points out, to an AI system, and basically making the system seem more intelligent or capable than it is. Game designers, just parenthetically, people who do work in kind of animation and in games and interactive agents have known this for many decades. This is not something that would be surprising to them, although it does appear to have been surprising to the folks at OpenAI when they developed these chatbots. Why does this work? because animations are inherently simplifying forms of representation, right? So this is one of Silvio's other points, right? Animations are schematic. They have to be. They're not. That's what makes them cartoony. They kind of pull particular aspects of a kind of an image or a person or an individual, and they crystallize them in some way, right? And they're dependent then on the tendency to make projective, or for tendency for humans to make projective inferences, right? So humans are doing a lot of the kind of social and emotional work, engaging with these systems. I have some other work that talks about this more broadly in the context of AI and the kind of way that inference is a kind of core question in the history of computing. Inference is not a bad thing, right? We humans use inference in all sorts of ways, including to find our food by tracking birds in the snow back in the day. But it does mean that all generative AI is in fact inferential AI. And I think one other point that to make here is that because animations entail kind of flattened form of representation, they also almost always rely on stereotypes, right? So fixed, simplified generalizations. In cartoons, such conjectures often become caricatures, right? Emotional expression, with its emphasis on the physicality of the body, is especially prone to stereotyping. Often in ways that, as cultural theorist Sian Nai has pointed out, really heavily reinforce existing gendered or racialized stereotypes. And so I think this is a way we can understand, it's another way we can understand why ChatGPT regurgitates so much bigoted or distorted text, right? Because, again, it's both because of the training data, but it's also because of, this kind of emphasis on stereotype. This is a problem in lots of contexts, including the kind of user experience design of representation online and in digital games. But I think I'll just leave the inference point for now. And then finally, my final point, the final point that Silvio makes really about animation in general, is that these characters often elicit powerful introjective emotional responses, right? So just to underscore this point, that it's about engaging the kind of social aspect of a human's perception, and really deliberately designing these systems to do that. Right. And I think this is an important point, right? That humans are very prone to projecting emotions onto inanimate objects. ChatGPT and similar chatbots are designed by the companies who develop them to heighten and increase that process. We saw this. There was a lot of kind of discussion about this example from a couple of years ago, where the New York Times columnist Kevin Roose had a conversation with Sydney, the Microsoft-based chatbot that is also based on GPT, and sort of he was unsettled. He said that the chatbot outputs suggested that it wanted him to leave his wife. And so there are two things here. One thing is, to sort of say that the system is a bit of a palimpsest that has drawn out, various topics from Roose himself, but also it suggests that the system is designed to be agreeable, as many people have pointed out. It's designed to engage on the social terrain that the person has started to talk about. And again here, right, the kind of connections between emotions and stereotype and conventional signifiers are very important, even in the context of a kind of text-based chatbot. Right. And I just want to emphasize the extent to which this phenomenon is unrecognized in the context of many discussions about these systems. Probably better recognized by Jane, by your undergrads, than it is by the people who work at Google. Right? I mean, I think Blake Lemoine, I think he's serious. I mean, he was fired from Google for making these claims about the sentience of ChatGPT. But it seems like a very strong example of the Eliza effect. All right, so these are just a few of the kind of characteristics of animated characters that I think apply really nicely to ChatGPT and related chatbots. And of course, it's worth saying that chatbots don't have to be based on ChatGPT, right? We have many chatbots in many different contexts. They're often less compelling because they don't have the kind of linguistic fluency of ChatGPT or similar kind of new stage generative systems. And this is where I think I just want to underscore how much the point about kind of applying a generative action to a very large text of human language is sort of the kind of core animating, the core animating trick, let's say, or the core animating mechanism through which these systems prove so compelling. So what does this have to do with undergraduate education and the future of research? So, right. So, it's important to just say once again here, right? These are systems are neither sentient nor intelligent, and as I think Jane has pointed out, they're not equivalent to either search engines or encyclopedias, right? They have a very different mechanism, conceptual mechanism, and technical mechanism of action. They're evocative and expensive textual animations, right? That are dependent on the text and training upon which they've received. And not even noting the cost of the water cost of powering, the data centers that do these inferences. I looked it up this morning. A 20 to 50 sentence interaction for ChatGPT, one interaction, one instance, uses half a liter of water. That's a lot of water. So I was looking, I'm trying to figure out what are college students actually using for these systems for. We've already heard a little bit about this. Writing and research. I think that goes again, Jane, to your points. And also, right, that they're using these systems for largely genre-based or kind of formalized text, right? So students understand very well the extent to which that these systems are good at replicating standardized formats, right? So it can spit out a kind of resume because the system has lots of examples of resumes, and it can, it kind of vaguely knows where things are going to be in the context of a resume, and can go from there. I mean, now we kind of do know that, but they're using it a lot. So, but I think what these systems also suggest is an important confirmation of some of the ideas from the history of media theory, and especially the history of information and the materialization of media. So here I'm thinking, right? The thing that I wanted to go from the last slide, I wanted to just underscore, right? The quote that comes out of this. This was from the Chronicle of Higher Ed, from the student. The quote that jumped out at me when I was just looking at this piece was the complaint that we're not being forced to think anymore, which is kind of an interesting question about what education is for. Why are we being forced to think? But anyway, so the point about the history of media theory, right? There's a kind of strand of it that runs from the earlier work of the historian of communication Harold Innis in the 1950s through to the kind of media theory of Marshall McLuhan in the 1960s and 70s, and that pops up in, I think, places like this piece, the future of the book, by the book is the sadly just recently deceased book historian Jeffrey Nunberg from the mid 1990s. Jeffrey Nunberg's piece, this very prescient piece, is called "Farewell to the Information Age." And in the mid 90s, just to underscore how forward-thinking this is, Nunberg really, makes a kind of McLuhan-esque or Innisian argument about the importance of the materiality of media to our understandings of its truthfulness and its authority. Right. So this is a long passage, but I think I'm gonna read it out at length because I think it's in a complicated piece kind of gives a sense of what he's talking about. Right. Philosophers often talk about information as a veridical notion, right? A truthful notion, but it is not. Right? The characteristic semantic feature of abstract information, understanding, the idea when we talk about information, is autonomy, right? The authorizing context is folded into the form of the document itself, right? So in other words, right, when we have an information genre, as Nunberg talks about, like an encyclopedia or a newspaper or a TV news broadcast, right? A lot of the kind of truthfulness of that information, or the kind of informativeness of that source, comes from the materiality and associated social dynamics or social conventions of that material media, right? So going back to this point, of course he says, look, we're all sophisticated readers, right? We all know that we can't trust everything in the newspaper, but we do trust that there is a certain set of standards, of relationships, of institutions, of conventions that shape the truthfulness or lack of truthfulness of the work. We can think about big debates about the kind of political coverage today as an example of fights over those kind of standards and modes. Right. And so Nunberg calls information a mode of reading, right? Which I think is a nice way to put it. So, right. So, this penumbra of shared truthfulness around these kind of material media, you know, has been totally broken down and in the age of digital technologies, which is why Nunberg talked about in like the mid-90s a farewell to the information age, even as Al Gore's information superhighway seemed to be the way to the future. Right? The implicit relationship between a medium's veridicality, its truthfulness, and its materialized authorizing context has become tenuous, right? Everyone on Twitter is now an expert. No one has access to local reliable news. If you make a page that looks like the New York Times or has certain conventions around user experience and style, people will believe it, even if it's full of nonsense. And so, this is why ChatGPT and other kind of similar large language models, I think, fit really neatly into this trajectory that Nunberg anticipated, because they are what the media studies scholar Sun Ha Hong terms technologies of speculation, right? They produce particular, parochial, plausible, and often self-fulfilling narratives regarding what the best answer or option is, right? So this has to do, for various reasons, it has to do with the model itself. It also has to do with what defaults are suggested, as Jane was pointing out, right? The idea that what the student will get in one of these systems first is the thing that they will 95% of the time engage with. Research in human-computer interaction has shown this is the case, right? People change defaults maybe 10 to 50% of the time on their devices. So whatever the default is going to powerfully impact the kind of way in which the system that device or system is used. And so I think understanding ChatGPT and similar LLM-powered bots as these kind of animated characters clarifies the capacities, limitations, and implications of these technologies in the context of education, and particularly in the context of teaching and learning undergraduates. I think I was really thrilled when Jane talked about the kind of concern that these are customer service agents or personal assistants or other sort of similar characters, because I think that's exactly what these systems are predisposed to produce. In the broader world, right, this can cause all sorts of problems. There's a parade of horribles, some of which more or less reliably sourced or reported, around the ways that the kind of persuasiveness of AI-based or chatbots is causing people to do all sorts of things and have all sorts of bad feelings. But I think in the context of education, and this is sort of where I'll try to wrap up, I also only have questions and challenges. I don't have any good answers. But I think that the combination of the persuasiveness and unreliability of these systems, and how that is exhibited as a kind of core function of their conceptualization and design, really push us, are exemplary towards this move that Nunberg foretold, right, from information as a mode of reading to one of what he calls automated intelligence, or what I might call animated intelligence, right, which is distinguished by performative dynamism in the service of the system's makers, not necessarily their interlocutors. Right, so it's not just that copyright issues become highly salient in these contexts. It's also that, right, there's rhetorical persuasiveness built into chatbots, whether for education purposes or not, that we might be suspicious as being deployed for non-pedagogical ends, right? OpenAI does not particularly care about education. They've proven that multiple times over the last 2 years, right? These companies are by and large private, right? And they're interested in increasing their market share and making money. So we might ask, to what extent can that kind of rhetorical persuasiveness of chatbots, can it be harnessed under current kind of social and technical conditions to assist students in finding the right answer, or is it really very challenging to see how that's possible? I'm certainly not the first person who's talked about this. Irina Dimitrescu had a wonderful piece in The Walrus, which is a Canadian publication about this topic last year. The challenge that outsourcing the difficult parts of writing and creating does sort of something pernicious to our individual sense of creativity and ability, our sense of wonder and engagement. I also think it's a really important labor question of reskilling and deskilling, right? That in fact, we should ask who benefits from the deskilling of our students' ability to do critical research, right? What skills are they being prepared for and encouraged to pursue in the context of these systems? So, right, and I think here this point about what is valued in the kind of conversations about how students use ChatGPT, is prompt management and in dealing with recursion, right? How do you tune your own responses to best engage with the system that you have no real control over, which might be useless because, as it turns out, some studies have shown ChatGPT prompts are best written by ChatGPT. So, so I think it's not just a kind of pedagogical question, but there's also a labor question. And I think for me, it's perhaps unsurprising that that these systems are an effect, right? A kind of output of a kind of knowledge production or education system that does often see a degree as a commodity, right? That if we have very large classes and give our students no time to write or read anything, then sure, they're gonna turn to the systems that will that seem to fit within that broader ethos. So I think there's a lot to talk about, a lot of questions that I hope we'll dig into today. I'm looking forward to it because I am not a librarian by training, but I'm grappling with these questions with my own students. So I'm looking forward very much to the conversation. I'll just end with a kind of bigger question, which is, what is the moral background of generative AI development, right? What values do these systems and their creators support? I think that's should always be an open question. I think this matches nicely with Jane's evocation of goals. What goals do we have for our students? What values do we understand as education being for? And I think certainly claiming that these technologies deserve recognitions as persons makes as much sense as doing the same for a Disney film. But I do think we need to have a kind of more reality-based conversation about how and when these systems should be used, and in fact, how and when these systems shouldn't be used. And making a kind of vaguely pop culture reference, I've got Frank Herbert here, who had many wacky ideas, but perhaps one of his less wacky was the question about the kind of duplication of the human mind in machines. So there's more information about this, or more of this argument, in a piece that was published at the ACM Conference on Fairness, Accountability, and Transparency this past June. So if you're interested, happy to send it along. And thanks a lot for your attention. I appreciate it.
Questions from the online audience, and then for those of you here in person, feel free to. We don't have a microphone. Mary, do we have the portable mic?
Oh, yeah.
Anyway, we'll get a microphone for the in-person audience. But at this point, yeah, we're open to questions, and then we'll break for coffee as well. And I guess while I have the podium, I will just tell you, because I did not tell you earlier, that the restrooms are over here to my right, in case anybody needs to run out, although you may have already found them. I don't know. I'll just grab it for now. Fantastic.
Right here, yeah.
Just waiting. Oh, you put it on, Mary?
Yeah, have it. I'm getting another one.
Okay, all good?
Dancing
Okay.
seals.
Thank you both for your talks. I appreciate it. I'm Kyle Jones from Indiana University, Indianapolis. Both of you raised the point that we have many questions and not many answers. But we're in a situation where, and I'm going to be talking about this a little bit later in my presentation, where we're already using the tools. Faculty, administration, our IT departments, and of course our students. So what is our responsibility as faculty members in terms of discussing appropriate AI use in the classroom when we don't really have the answers? Is the gut reaction to shut it down, is that actually appropriate? Or should we go into the gray moral zone and play around for the sake of learning and figuring things out?
That is the question. I mean, I know that a lot of us are working in contexts where we have been given some options by our institution, right? No AI use, some AI use, all AI use. I've been trying as much as possible to think about this in terms of, this is not, I'm constantly feeling like I'm in a debate about whether should be using AI tools or not. But I think the debate is really about what are we trying to do, right? So I get in these conversations all the time where people, where if I say I have concerns about using AI tools in a writing classroom, that's somehow seen as I am afraid of technology, right? And therefore the debate should be about technology. But the debate is really about what are we trying to teach our
Pedagogy,
students,
yeah.
right? What is it that this classroom is doing? And I think, so I think down the line, it's going to be impossible it's already not possible. I mean, you can say we prohibit using these tools. You can't tell in many cases what's going on. And I think what we really need to be doing is talking about what we're trying to do and where these tools serve that. But along with that, and what I've been doing, it's easy for me because I teach a course about ChatGPT, but what I've been doing in my own classroom is that I think students need to understand the things that I'm talking about, the things that Luke is talking about. How do these tools work? What do they do? And students are not coming out of high school with that information. And there doesn't seem to be a place in a lot of our institutions where that is happening. Going along with that, right, many faculty members at many institutions are receiving a free ChatGPT or other account without any training about, if you go ask a faculty member, how do large language models work, right? That's not really a thing for a lot of people. I think we really need to start there. So there's critical AI literacy. There's also just AI literacy. My students begin with, they're writing a paper right now, how do large language models work? Explain this to an audience of your choice. And we've spent the whole week reading about this. This seems to me something that we all have to know and do before a faculty member can even make a policy that makes sense for their goals in the classroom. So no answer, just more thought.
Yeah, I'll second everything that you just said, but I'll also say that I think there can be a challenge when the broader kind of economic or political or social incentives for many institutions are so pro using these systems, right? So at Western, my institution, essentially, faculty can decide on their own whether to what extent they use these systems in the classroom, which I think actually is, frankly, then casts them onto the broad kind of broad public opinion wave where the voices that are pro these systems have up until this point been very loud. That may be changing a little bit in terms of the general conversation about AI and also its kind of stock market value. But then, and I was going to put this in my slide deck, what the advice of my institution is for students. And essentially the advice for students is, well, these are really powerful technologies and you have a responsibility to educate yourself about how they work. Talk to your faculty, talk to a faculty member, which, is a kind of a pretty loose answer for an educational institution. So I think that I totally agree. I think that being extremely reality-based about what these systems can and can't do, and explicit in your classes, I think that's the first step. I think, talking a little bit about the kind of the academic integrity challenges of these systems is important. It is, in fact, a kind of direct copying of ChatGPT is plagiarism, right? Because it's passing off some words that you did not create yourself as your own, in my opinion. But even if you're not doing that, even if you're iterating or doing all these different ways of using the system, I think that talking about the goals of a class, the utility of a class. I'm very lucky because I teach, I don't teach a big, let's say first or second year undergraduate class, right? So I can tell my fourth year seminar students or my graduate students, you are here to, you're learning certain things about, your research skills and your capacities. Using this is going to degrade that. In a class of 100 people or 50 people even, where the whole system has been set up to sort of be a bit of a mill of content, it's a lot harder to make that argument because you yourself as a faculty member are kind of also feeling like you're in a mill and you're kind of producing stuff. So that's not very satisfying. But I do think that, like, talking about it first of all is important. Being aware of what these systems do, working with the folks on your campus who do know how these systems work, if you don't, and having them, having a reality-based community having a reality-based community and a reality-based conversation about them. But I do really think, I will say, I won't go into details, but I will say from my own institution, sometimes those of us who do care about these technologies and how they work, you know, we are here, we are available. Sometimes the folks in power don't want to hear about it, right?
Right. We have, I just wanted to acknowledge that we do have some questions from the online audience, but I think you are next in the back. Go ahead.
Okay, my name is Jo Seo, second year PhD student at School of Communication and Information Studies here. I have a question about the concept of critical AI literacy, what Ms. Dr. Rosenzweig mentioned at the end of the presentation. So what are the definition of this concept and what are the aspects of the concept, like a strength, weaknesses, opportunity, and threats of AI? Do we have one as an and last one, as an educator of next generation of humankind? How can we educate students to improve their technology literacy, including generative AI?
Take that one, the critical AI literacy.
Oh, no.
Or else we can ask Laura
You-
to take.
I mean, yeah, I feel not well qualified to give a technical definition. I think, you know, I think that some of this is a need for more social science and technology studies, social studies of science, information science, right, as a kind of component of curriculum more broadly. But yeah, I will not try to define it. Someone, yeah, go please. Yeah.
It from Lawrence.
I have a handout that I can send to you.
Yeah, well, yeah, there are many,
Yeah.
many documents.
I think I have to speak into the microphone for the sake of the archive, even though I sort of, my voice gets out. There are many available documents. One of the first people I ever saw in print using the term was Maha Bali, and she has a nice blog post about it. But Critical AI at Rutgers, the initiative that co-organized this event with Francesca, has a detailed document called Teaching Critical AI Literacies and a student-facing document about it. So we'll put those things in the chat, but you can also find them on our website. People just define it differently. AI literacy is something that often is used in a way that is that overlaps with critical AI literacies in the sense that people who teach critical AI literacies think that you should understand AI. But some people define AI literacies when it comes to generative AI as teaching your students how to prompt or that sort of thing. For us, because we have a journal called Critical AI edited here at Rutgers, we have critical AI initiatives. It's very important from our standpoint that the critical in critical AI literacies is not defined as a thumbs down. It is defined as using discernment and judgment. I got that from the Oxford English Dictionary, which got it from, a Greek-related definition of the term. And what we're about in that respect is empowering students and colleagues and citizens to be able to make their own judgments about what they're using these tools for, if they're going to use these tools, when they're going to use it, or when they're definitely not going to use it. And in that sense, what Kyle mentioned, this sort of, they're out there where people are already using it is both true. Otherwise we wouldn't be talking about it in some sense, but also it can, I know Kyle wasn't intending it that way, but it can trivialize the point. And it can actually immobilize people's feelings of empowerment, because these tools may be tempting for our students, but they are not empowering them, and they know it. Very few students feel empowered by these tools, but many students feel empowered by learning how they work and realizing that they have choices.
I don't know who was first.
I think, John, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I have a question for Luke. I really like this definition of animation that you gave in terms of the construction of social others. We project sort of human qualities into the environment. So I was wondering, okay, so if by social here we mean, you know, engagement between two entities that are conscious, then clearly LLMs are not conscious. However, we seem to already be like, the train has left the station in terms of the animation of LLMs. So I was wondering what your kind of dream scenario would be for what would be the best way to animate LLMs, either visually or linguistically, in your dream scenario. I mean, I understand you would prefer that we not animate them at all. I take that to be true, but given that they are being animated, if you worked at OpenAI, would you, for example, never let ChatGPT speak in the first person, or you have other ideas along those lines?
Yeah, they will never hire me, but that's fine. Well, I think, I do think I mean, just going back to the definition, this is Terry Silvio's definition. I think the point about the kind of construction and projection of social others is important, right? So it doesn't, the interlocutor doesn't have to be it just doesn't have to be sentient or alive or anything, right? It's sort of really, I think in some ways thinking more about the projective tendencies of humans and how easily they can be activated. I mean, people see faces, to kind of take a related example, in electrical plugs, right? They're complicated, good, but probably good, biological reasons for this. But it is just a tendency of humans that we have to grapple with, and designers have to grapple with. To your question, yeah, I do actually think that well, so first of all, I think, right, this question goes back to what problem are are LLMs the solution for, right? Because if, and that then would structure how we would understand their design. Because I can't think of many particularly useful ways of deploying these systems in the classroom, and actually not even so much in professional context, although there may be some. I don't think that none of the solutions for which this system would be appropriate seems to require a first person kind of interface. Look, people may then ascribe personality and agency to it anyway, even if it doesn't have a first person interface, because people are really good at that and will ascribe personality to a volleyball with a handprint on it. But I guess, yeah, where I've been thinking about this in the context of design requirements, or design suggestions, yeah, is really a distinction between the human tendency to do this and the kind of ability to elicit that response through interactive animation, through these particular anthropomorphization, that kind of thing. So yeah, I mean, look, I mean, as an example, I mean every useful every use case that I've heard from professionals in various contexts where they find ChatGPT useful is like the utility infielders of the knowledge world. Like, I have a friend who teaches ESL. She's at a college. She uses it to produce language level specific phrases for her ESL learners. Which is a perfectly reasonable thing that she knows how to do, and if she gets the ChatGPT to produce those phrases, she's not going to probably lose her capacity to do that. But then the question is this incredibly resource intensive, copyright infringing system really the best solution for that very quotidian thing? So yeah, I think generally speaking they shouldn't have any kind of anthropomorphic elements. And I think really I think we should ask what they're useful for. Sorry,
Thank you.
long-winded answer.
I'm going to cut in right now just because I want to try to get some of the online audience questions addressed. There is actually a question that is somewhat related from Taesung, who says, "Thank you for these wonderful presentations. I'd like to ask about the gap between what these GPTs could be and how students likely use them. Have you come across any AI models that attempt to bridge those gaps by playing a different kind of model that doesn't simply provide the answers, products? For example, what about bots that take students step by step through a lesson by asking more Socratic questions?"
I think there's definitely people are working on these. I haven't worked extensively with Conmigo. They promise this sort of thing. I know there's some pilots going on at my institution for very specific courses. So there's a famous course at Harvard called CS50. It's a computer science course. They have a bot that they have made that does exactly what the questioner was describing. I think this all seems very different to me than what happens in a writing process. So I'm speaking from a writing point of view, right, and a research point of view. Those seem, and I haven't used them, but the research on them suggests that they're working because in a sense, they do know what problem they're trying to solve, right, which is working, someone has a problem in their code and they would be having this conversation with someone and maybe the bot can step in and help them go step by step work through the code. The difference in the writing process seems to be that the problem these sorts of bots are constantly set up to solve is the problem of writing itself. And so
Which is a problem.
which is a
A real
problem,
problem.
right? And so when we break it down and we say, well, could they help with the brainstorming process? Well, certainly there are bots that are helping with the brainstorming process, but as someone who's in the classroom, that seems to me a process that actually, as we've talked a little bit about empowering students, right? Having your own ideas and figuring out how your ideas relate to a conversation of ideas is something I want my students to be able to do. So yes, a bot maybe could brainstorm with you or for you, but I keep testing out a bot to brainstorm that very quickly, you know, it's just, it's doing the brainstorming. And those are the lines that I think are difficult.
Carrie?
Hi, is this on? My name's Carrie. I'm a PhD student at UPenn, and thank you so much for these wonderful conversations. My head is spinning with a lot of ideas. I think the question I want to ask is moving towards then this kind of answering that we want to do about what is AI useful for, or what can we achieve with it? Are there learning goals that can be met with it? One thing I've wondered is the extent to which shifts in pedagogy pedagogy can shift more towards process rather than output, which I think conventionally we have quite a strong output model in a lot of classrooms, especially in graduate school where it's kind of turn in your long final paper at the end of the year. And what it would mean to scaffold assignments, and could they be designed in a way that makes it difficult for a full chatbot application? I mean, theoretically, it could kind of just do any assignment for you, I guess, but I wonder where that kind of like hack might be. And the one second thing I wanted to mention is there's this set of tools I learned, I think through TikTok, called goblin.tools based on the ChatGPT architecture. And that's where I thought the use of AI became interesting because it was designed for neurodivergent people to reorganize kinds of thinking and modes of expression for better understanding. So you get an email and you don't know how to understand the tone. You can input it and it will try to deliver a presumptive tone based on sort of the statistical propositions of emotions that's read in there. You can also have it translate your own text to be nicer, to be more firm. As someone who uses a lot of exclamation points in her emails, and I just want to say, this modeled for me a different way of speaking. And it also can prioritize really long lists where you don't know how to organize what to do next. And so my affiliated question there is there something that AI offers in terms of internal like in mind organization or rethinking as opposed to external output. So helping you process large amounts of data or look at it in a different way in this kind of sense. I don't know. So yeah, the question about the classroom, scaffolding, and is there's like internal reasoning processes that can help you sort through information.
You teach writing, so.
I'll take the
Yeah.
process one and
Yeah.
then maybe punt to Luke for
Sure.
the internal organization. So I teach a course that's heavily scaffolded, a first year writing course. You know, every step we have sort of class discussion, we have response papers, we have short drafts, we have long drafts. I mean, I think scaffolding is important because as I always tell my students, like the world doesn't need more papers. That's not why we're doing this, right? We're not producing papers. We are using a writing assignment as one way of working through a set of ideas. And that happens to be a way that you do that in college. And I'm the first person who shows you how to do that. So yeah, I mean, I think the idea that the product is important in a scaffolded first year writing course is already gone. And yet we're still struggling with this because those steps, I mean, the article that Luke showed by Owen Terry that was in the Chronicle of Higher Ed, a Columbia student, you know, you have no idea how we're using ChatGPT. It was really interesting because he was actually saying, I'm not using it to generate a paper. I'm using it to go through every step and shorten the amount of time I have to spend. I have it brainstorm. I have it give me a list of questions. I choose a question. I go from there. If you really want to do that, you're always going to be able to do that. I don't think all of our students want to do that, but there's so many external pressures, right? Other courses, grades. Some of my students have mentioned the feeling that everyone else is using it as a problem, right? So I think we're all working on changing the way we scaffold those assignments. I do think that there are a lot of assignments in college and high school that aren't scaffolded. This is exactly the first step that those courses should be taking, right? Why are we doing this in the first place and bringing students into that process?
Just briefly, my husband is a high school English teacher, actually, and in fact, I think in some ways it's easier. It's been easier for him to move to scaffolding and get results because high school is much more monitored. I mean, you have the smaller assignment. I mean, just the way that high schools work, you can, if you have your students scaffold an assignment and you look at their Google Drive and they've pretty clearly copied something, you can kind of see all that, right? There's a kind of a level of surveillance, which for better or for worse, does not exist in the college context. And so I think, yeah, I agree. Scaffolding is totally the first step. I've started scaffolding my final papers. I think also because it's just a better way to do it, right? Like it's also a better way to like have them not do it the night before and produce a bad output. To your point about Goblin art, I've never heard of this, and it's fascinating, particularly because of the emphasis on emotion and emotional expression for my own work. I mean, I think that all media technologies have an impact on our internal sense of subjective self, right? I think lots of people have written about this in various ways, books, radio. I mean, radio, the example that I always think is fascinating is this movie Inside Out, right? And its sequel that just came out, which actually depicts the interiority of the human mind as a set of media technologies, right? As well as kind of having a theory of how emotions work, which is wrong, but that's fine. But I think that they do. I think that the point about neurodivergence and the kind of the organization of information is important and well taken. But I also think that if those structures are then being, I don't know who's producing these Goblin tools, right? If they're being produced on top of a kind of ChatGPT architecture, it means that at some level, the kind of the conceptual underpinnings of ChatGPT are what's there as the default, right? I actually think it's fascinating to think about the idea of like grammars of action and neurodivergence. I thought was like that just was a thing that popped into my head, but I do think it matters, but I think it's complex, even for people who are neurodivergent.
Just a quick note on this. One of the things that I've been thinking a lot about is how much better these tools work for people who already know how to do the thing. So not speaking in
Yeah.
terms of a neurodivergent context, but just
Experts.
generally, right? Like I mean, I find that I don't want to use ChatGPT because I know how to do the thing. But if I use it, I know how to use it better than my students do because I know how to do the thing. And I wonder if that translates anytime we're thinking, what problem are we trying to solve with this technology? The person, and this goes back to the way large language models work and the problems with them, right? The person who already knows how to do the thing is going to be better able to judge the output.
Which is, I think, an argument for not using these in the pedagogical context at all, because we know that our students don't know how to do the thing, generally speaking, or they know how to do the thing less well than they could. We also know that we want teaching to be about the inculcation of an ability to critically think. That is exactly what these systems don't do. They don't critically think, right? And so we're teaching these students who rely on the systems to do the to not do the critical thinking for them, but give a simulacrum of the critical thinking.
That's why when you do this thing, oh, AI won't take your job. Someone who knows how to use AI will take your job. What I really think is going to turn out to be true is someone who knows how to do the thing without AI, but maybe uses AI sometimes will take your job.
Someone who knows what AI can't do.
Exactly. But the idea that just knowing how to use AI in some kind of vacuum is a solution to something is worrisome.
Okay, I think we're going to go over here and I'm going to try to get us back on schedule as much as possible. So maybe one more question and then we'll break.
Thanks for a great morning already. This is Liz Sylvan, Harvard University Berkman Klein Center, Brown University School of Engineering and ITS Rio in Rio. So I want to get back to the point about what problem you're trying to solve. And I think this relates to the anonymous attendee before Tae Sung's question as well about working at an institution that serves first generation college students, many of whom are ELL. Of course, depending on the kind of institution you're working in, the kind of class you're teaching, you have different goals for your students. And I think in a way, the universities have been dealing with questions about what their purpose is and whether it's worth the cost for a while. And I wonder how the two panelists think about how these pressures that our universities are experiencing, that students are experiencing, when they take loans to get education, and maybe, those loans are more significant issues for some than others. How should we, or how are you thinking about, how this impacts what you want to be teaching your students to do, or what we might be wanting to teach our students to do? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, and this goes back to the point about values. I mean, I think trying as much as possible in the day-to-day hurly-burly of life to connect these specific challenges and technical issues and day-to-day, to the bigger systemic and structural questions is really important, right? So in many areas of AI, critical AI studies, right, I think you see what Virginia Eubanks, who's a fabulous scholar, right, in her book Automating Inequality, talks about as a triage mentality, right? That the assumption is there will never be enough resources for a public good, whether it be universities, whether it be homelessness, whether it be mental health services, whatever, right? And so because there's never going to be enough resources for us, we have to triage. We have to we have to do the stopgap. And yeah, the chatbot therapist isn't as good as the real therapist, but what are we going to do? We can't hire more therapists. Well, why can't we hire more therapists? Why can't we build more housing, right? I know this gets alarmingly political very quickly, but the politics are already there, right? And so when we talk about, how should we be teaching our students? I think, look, we have to balance between, how do we grapple with the fact that these technologies are being used and they are there, but also then what do we want universities to be doing, right? And do we want them to be doing the things that they're doing now? And who is we? It's it's uncomfortable because it takes us to kind of bigger political questions, but I think those political questions are important. I'll say, I mean, look, I'm not sure that's even if you put it on that terrain, it's not easy. So we have a very strong faculty union at Western, which is great. The faculty union doesn't really know what to do about generative AI either. They're also like, I don't know. So they're also figuring that out. But yeah.
I mean, maybe we need to be playing with the tools too.
I think one thing, I didn't see the question that you're referring to, but I think one concern I have that sort of goes along with what Luke is talking about, that I'm at a relatively well-funded institution, but that I hear a lot that, you know, these chatbots are going to solve problems that are really funding problems, right? So you have a giant first-year writing class. Now you can get chatbot feedback for your students, and therefore we don't need to spend on this. And I think we really need to just go back to what are we doing here, right? Because if the problem these things are going to solve is that we're not teaching our students well in these contexts, then we're back to the problems of whether these chatbots are actually really going to teach our students well instead. And I think it's just being sold from so many angles as a magic solution to some very real entrenched problems. And as always, I think the institutions that are underfunded and struggling are going to get the short end of this deal, whatever this deal is.
And I'm definitely not against playing with the tools. I just think playing with the tools, you know, is in some ways, I mean, the word play, I mean, it actually kind of assumes that you're not using them for anything very serious. And you know, I think when we stop playing with them and start institutionalizing them, that's the worry.
And maybe there are some problems that they're going to solve, but the idea that they're going to solve the problems that they're being pitched to solve is worrisome.
All right. I just want to acknowledge that the online audience has some questions about how do we bring students into these questions and conversations about, you know, who benefits from people using generative AI tools, and how do you know, in this discussion about values. But we're going to close here for now, just because I know those questions will come back. And I would like to invite us to take a break until, shall we say 11:20? Is that okay? Or
Yes.
yeah, okay. So we'll be back at 11:20. Thank you. Luke and James.